In today's video, we're going to do a gear guide for level 170 in preparation for Darkmoor around the corner. A lot of you guys have requested me to post all my gear guides, and I usually tend to do it around this time of the year. So we're going to be going in depth into what jewels you should be using, as well as what weaving you should be doing, as well as the different pet combinations that you can use for your school. So if you do enjoy this type of content, be sure to leave a like, subscribe, all type of stuff. And let's get into the intro that I'm going to be using for the rest of my videos for the next 7 days, I guess. So let's talk about some pieces that I'm going to be recommending in the video. You're going to hear me talk a lot about Avatar and Reaver in majority of these videos. And I know I get this question asked a lot: which should I farm? Should I farm Avatar for Salinopolis gear, or should I farm Reaver for Wallaroo gear? Now the dead set answer is it comes down to personal preference. If you already have Wallaroo gear, which is the Reaver gear, you don't need to farm Avatar. And if you already have Avatar, you don't need to farm Reaver. If you're just starting out, I recommend farming Avatar in Salinopolis instead of farming Reaver in Wallaroo, because it's a little bit more tedious and not everyone's going to be farming that, just because it's been a while and not many people care about it too much currently. But I do want to preface, I will be talking about it in the video. Certain Avatar pieces I prefer and certain Reaver pieces I prefer. So you'll see me talk like Reaver boots I might prefer more than Avatar boots. I might prefer Avatar hats versus Reaver hats, stuff like that. So just pay attention when I do mention those. They're the exact same stats. I have to clarify this all the time. They're the exact same stats, just the difference is item cards. If you do not care about item cards, just farm Avatar, straight up. Also in my setups, I do tend to mention a lot of Shabalba, Hunhao, Private Eye, all that type of stuff. So if you hear me mention Shabalba, Hunhao, that is from the Azteca raid, the Crying Sky raid that you can do in guilds. If you hear me mention Private Eye and Crime Fighter, that is from the new raid, which is the Ghastly Conspiracy raid. So just pay attention when I do mention out those names. Now, if I do mention that I use Shabalba or Hunhao pieces, you don't necessarily have to go out and go farm them right away. The reason why I currently use them is because of them item cards. Now, what you should be doing is farming the new raid, Ghastly Conspiracy raid. It's the same wands as Shabalba and Hunhao. The only difference is the item cards. But Shabalba and Hunhao will not be getting 180 upgrades in the future. The new raid will. So if you want to preemptively get ready for 180, you should be farming the new raid, get those wands for the stats that I mentioned, and then hopefully whenever we get 180, we will have those upgrades for the new raid, and you can use those pieces as well in your builds, which I 100% will be. Certain pieces of Shabalba and the rod wands from the new raid are better than actually Reaver and Avatar, so be wary about that as well. They give like an extra pierce and stuff like that, so just keep that in mind. When it comes to the wands, I do want to preface this. I do prefer the Shabalba wands from the Azteca raid a little bit more than the rod wands currently in the Ghastly Conspiracy raid. Yes, they have the same exact stats, but I do like the item cards on the Shabalba wands. So when it comes to preference, number one to me is Shabalba currently. Number two is going to be the rod wands from the current raid, which is the Ghastly Conspiracy raid. Number three, if you don't have either of those options, you can use the Fairy K wands from the Fairy K pack in the Crown shop. And then after that, if you don't want to do any of those three, you don't want to do the raid, or you don't want to open packs, use Reaver, Avatar. It's really up to you. They both have the same exact stats, just item cards are different. I don't have a preference between them. They're in the same tier in my opinion. When it comes to amulets, if you hear me talk about amulets, Private Eye is my number one recommendation right now, unless you are balanced, which I will be putting a certain section for balance whenever I do make the balance video. But for amulets, for every school except balance, I prefer Private Eye as my number one priority because I do like the item cards. After that is Reaver, which you can get from, of course, Wallaroo. Those give you a blade, which I prefer. I know Hunhao and Shabalba, Private Eye, Crime Fighter have slightly better stats, but I really put the item card at a higher value in my opinion. So that's why I put Reaver as your secondary option. And then third, it's a split between three different templates, which is Hunhao, Shabalba, and Fairy K. Yes, Shabalba and Fairy K are exactly the same, but I don't really care for the item cards too much on them, just because you're getting those same exact item cards from the Shabalba one. So that's why I'm putting them on the same tier. And then after that, Avatar is bottom tier, just because yes, it has the same stats as Reaver, but the item cards on it are not really sought after at all. So that's why it is at the bottom tier. And then lastly, when it comes to decks, you're going to hear me talk about decks. I prefer Private Eye decks because you do get that blade. When it comes to it after that, my recommendation is using the Shabalba decks from the Azteca raid. And then after that, if you don't want to do either of the raids, you can use Reaver, Avatar. It's really just up to you, personal preference. I put them on the same tier just because they both have blades and traps depending on your school that are useful. So they're in the same tier. I feel like just getting both are really good to have. And then after that, I think the bottom tier is Hun Hao and Fairy K, because they don't really give you anything that's useful. They both give like terrible cards in my opinion. And then lastly, what I want to mention in this intro is when I do mention pins and power pins, run whatever you want. It's dealer's choice. You can choose whatever you like. I don't have a vendetta or anything like that against a certain school. Use whatever pins at the end of the day. There is no like end all be all. Have fun with your PvE builds at the end of the day. When it comes to power pins, I do recommend different pins depending on your school. So my recommendations out of all the power pins is Storm, Balance, Death, or Fire. If you are on a Storm, I do recommend using Life. Now let me quickly explain this. I do recommend Storm pins if you ever get Mantle in your fight and you are using the Weaving Blades from Weaving, which I will be mentioning as well. Those are Storm School majority of the time. So that's why I do recommend that, just to prevent a Mantle. And it's the same argument for Balance and Death, because hey, if you're using Elemental Blades, Elemental Traps, Balance Blades, Dragon Blades, whatever, a Balance Pin is just nice on the off chance you do get hit with a Mantle. Death has the same argument, because hey, if you ever get hit with the Feint, or if you're trying to use a TC Dark Pact in any sort of scenario, or maybe in Power, and you get hit with a Mantle, you do have at least a better chance of not fizzling it due to you having Power Pins. And then Fire is in that niche category, which I like using at times, just so I don't have to switch my Scald and Syndiate setups, because those I can just put on a Fire pin, and then all I have to do is switch my hat and switch my wand, and I'm good to go. So that's why I have Fire pins as well listed for that reason. And then Life pins, it falls underneath a niche category. It's specifically for Storm, just because their Weaving Blade is through Life currently, and maybe in future guides I might adjust this, but Storm is using Life Weaving majority of the time, and having a Life pin for accuracy is good to have, just so you don't fizzle your dual blade on the off chance you get hit with a Mantle. And then you can use Life as well in other schools if you want to. Maybe you're trying to use some healing spells, but I don't really have a recommendation for that, because in max level, you're not really healing as much in casual play if you have the min-max setups. Another thing I want to mention for when it comes to the builds that I'm going to be mentioning is the tier jewels. Now, when it comes to tier jewels, I usually use health opals. But if you want to and you don't want to use health opals, I strongly recommend that you either socket a potent trap as well as a sharpened blade. It can be either or you can do both. It's good to have very good stackability purposes for when you're farming stuff and you need to use different buffs, but that's a strong recommendation if you want to use those instead of using a health tier socket as well. Of course, you can socket on different item cards like a star blade or like a certain trap, etc. By all means, go for it. But my recommendation is either put on health or put on sharpened blade or potent trap. Those are my only recommendations when it comes to tier sockets. I will be talking about pets and stuff, but that will be in a later section in this video. But that is it for this intro. This is a template for all my videos, and I just want to keep it straightforward like that. The only thing that's going to be slightly different is if you're balanced, which I will be mentioning in the balance video whenever I post that guide. Because the wands, amulets, and decks, I have a slight little bit of different preference on that school because the item cards are so weird for balance. So I'm just putting that out there. But we can actually get into the whole rest of the video. Now that we got the intro out the way, let's talk about weaving for ice. Now, you don't need to do the most insane amount of ranks for ice, I feel like, just because there's only specific ones that you want to get done, and they're pretty easy in my opinion. The number one recommendation is Surge, but you only need to do rank 1 on him in my opinion. Because if you see what other spells he gives, the Tempest Wyvern and the Skull Amplify, this doesn't give you the Attenuate. So if your other schools, he give you an Attenuate, depending on your school of course, but for Ice, he gives you an Amplify, which you're not really using. So you can only, realistically, my recommendation is just to only rank 1 and get yourself the Blade, which is over here, the Skull Blade. It's good for yourself, it's good for supporting other players, and whenever you're trying to use it for yourself, you can obviously use the Sharpened Blade, 55 blades, of course, I always mention this, and just switch your pip to Storm. See, people complain about the pip cost every time. It's just because they're not using the school pip, so then they complain a lot and they're like, oh, I'm losing 3 pips, when in actuality just have a Storm pip and you're fine. So there is that. Now, beyond rank 1 of Storm, which I feel like is the number 1 priority, what are the other options? Now, I always mention Old Sage, but you can do Old Sage or Harmony. And if you do Old Sage, you would want to do rank 2 of Myth, but if you want to do Harmony, you want to do rank 3. And the difference is, realistically, is you get a dual trap from here, and you also get a dual trap from Balance. But the one from here is Ice and Myth, while the Balance one is Ice and Balance. The one that's Ice and Balance requires rank 3, while Old Sage requires rank 2. But if I had to pick between them, I would probably pick Winter Trap, just because to buff up the Myth hitters, and the people that are cosplaying as Myth in certain strats. So it's good for those fights that you can't use feints, you can't use blades, you can't use X amount of pip traps. It's very nice to have, and it's something that I would definitely get out and go do. And there's a valid argument for harmony as well if you want to buff a balance hitter, but it's very niche. It depends on the team comp, but still, I think this is more of like a recommendation in my opinion. And beyond that, I don't think there's really anything you should do else, because when it comes to Viv, she gives you a rank 4 dual blade, but specifically at rank 4, which is like the only downside. I mean, of course, if you want to buff a life hitter, by all means, sure, you can use this and you can have a valid argument behind it. But I just don't think it's worth wasting that much time towards it. And then same thing with Charlie. Charlie doesn't have anything crazy. And then Morrison does give you an attenuate, but the thing is with the Morrison attenuate, it buffs ice and deaths. So it's very, in that niche category, just because it requires a death hitter, or maybe someone cosplaying as a death, or maybe even someone cosplaying as an ice. But even then, it falls into that niche category. I feel like get yourself your surge done for rank 1, and then that's just the important one. Beyond that, if you want to go a little bit further, go do Old Sage and do rank 2, or if you want to have a balance hitter on your team, sure, you can do Harmony rank 3. And then if you really want the attenuate for the death supports, or like supporting deaths, I guess, you can do death rank 2. But I don't recommend Viv. Yes, you do get the blade at rank 4, but honestly, I think rank 5 will probably change my opinion on most of these, but those are my recommendations for when it comes to weaving, at least. So when it comes to the builds, we have a normal Frilla setup, we also have a Pierce mount setup, a no mount setup, and then one extra build which I'm incorporating for Life and Ice Wizards. I did this for the Life guide. I'm doing the same exact thing for Ice because it's with your damage, as your school doesn't really get the highest damage unless you do some specific niche things. So that's why we have this full damage build, which I will showcase at the end of the video. But let's start off with the Frilla set bonus, which is right here. You'll have 201 damage, decent amount of health, decent amount of res, as well as 51 pierce. Now this is because I try to aim for 50 pierce at least bare minimum on most of my setups, and then I allocate the rest towards damage. So that's why we have 201. And then of course all the other stats don't really matter. I mean, you're always gonna have pips, everything like that. It's a very straightforward thing. And 13k HP. I mean, you can obviously have more, I'm pretty sure, because obviously I don't have all the sockets on, which you guys will see. But when it comes to the hat, we are using Avatar. Use whatever sword pins, use whatever, does not matter. I feel like I've gotten a couple of DMs the past couple of days of people asking, do I just copy your pins? You don't have to. Like, I'm not even using any death spells. I just have these on just to have them on. I think the shield pin, I feel like balance is nice to have, but you can also put Storm. Storm is probably a better recommendation, but I just have balance on currently for specific niche things I was up to. But I would recommend Storm Resist instead. So there's that. But Avatar or Reaver hat, I just prefer Avatar for the blade. Robe, we're using Demonic. Pins don't matter. Obviously, pay attention to the beginning of the video. But Demonic Robe, which you get from Personal Daemon in the Kabbalist raid, which is the Polaris raid. Now, of course, if you don't do raids, you're probably wondering, well, what do I do? Well, you just go to the crown shop and you go over to the Marleybone Motorist pack, which you can get the Ice Robe and all the other robes I mentioned in all the setups, which is from this pack. So I do recommend actually opening this pack if you don't want to raid. It's just an option. So right here, if you see Chill Autoist, I don't know how to pronounce it, Overcoat, same exact stats, you guys can see. It's just the item card difference. The Frost Feather, which is like the hidden bubble, is better for PvP. People like to have copies of it. But the Blizzard, I guess it falls into that niche category of like certain things. So that's why I'm just like, you know what, it's really up to you. I don't really care. I mean, if you don't have Blizzard spell elements at all because you haven't been doing event stuff, then sure, get the robe from the pack just to have a advanced combat variation of Blizzard so you can use it for, like, who knows, like maybe Mount Olympus challenge mode or something. But other than that, it doesn't really matter which one you have. It just comes down to what you've been doing in the game. Boots, we are using Reaver. You can use Reaver Avatar. I prefer Reaver because the Ice Trap is very good for those solo fights, so it's just a personal preference, but you can have either or, doesn't really matter. Wand, I use Shabalba. You have the option between like 3 different wands. You can use Shabalba, you can use the Rod wands from the Ghastly Conspiracy raid, and you can use the Fairy K wands from the pack, or Reaver Avatar. Now I use Shabalba because I like the Moontrap on here. Very good for my solo fights, just to have for stackability stuff. But what you should be doing, which I've been mentioning in all my videos, is that you should be collecting the Rod wands instead. Now the reason why I say this is because these are exactly the same stats as Shabalba. Shabalba's from, of course, the Shabalba raid, which is the Azteca raid, and the Crafty Rod is from the new one, which is the Ghastly Conspiracy raid. But I prefer the Shabalba one because I like the item card. But in future references, whenever we get 180 upgrades, you're going to be using the rods. You just generally are. So you should be prepping this ahead of time and getting a bunch of shards so you can upgrade those whenever we do get 180 upgrades for the wands. So that's my real recommendation. But if not, you can just use the Fairy K wand from the pack. I just don't like the item cards that are given from there. And then other than that, you can use Reaver or Avatar wand. It just comes down to personal preference. But for me, Shabalba number 1, number 2 is the rods, number 3 is the Fairy K pack, and then Reaver Avatar right at the end. That's really it. And then the Athame, we are using the Mushu Athame. You can use the Avalon as well. These are both from the Gold Key Boss. Just remember, Gold Key Boss. So if you do like 2 to 3 runs of the Gold Key Boss, you can easily craft the Athames. It's really not that hard. So it's not like a super grind where you need like 20 plus runs. You only need like 3 runs. And they're all easy strats of like 1 to 2 round, depending on your team comp. So go do that. And the reason why we're realistically using it is because we get the triangle socket. So we can get that epic jewel. The epic jewel is 315. So it's comparing it to, for example, the regular epic, which is 300, you get plus 15 on here. Now, if you don't want to farm it, which I know some people do mention it to me, like, hey, I don't want to farm it, just use Reaver Avatar. It's not a big deal. You can just drop the triangle socket for extra health. You can get another 700 HP. It won't affect your damage stats in any sort of way. Of course, Reaver will give you more HP as well as more block, but everything else is still exactly the same or like lowered in a certain extent. But you're really using this for the triangle socket if you want to use the epic jewel, which I know not everyone's going to be using it on an ice, but it comes down to personal preference on what's your favorite school. But realistically, if you don't use the Mushu or Avalon Gold Key Boss Athame, just simply use Reaver Avatar and then just put on a square socket. By all means, do that. Amulet, we are using Private Eye. I know some people use Shabalba or like Han Hao, but I like to use Private Eye for the blade. I've been mentioning this in all my setups. The blade is really nice to have. It's not only good for yourself, you can use that for supporting capabilities for a fire storm. So it's very nice to have in my opinion. But if you don't want to use a Private Eye, you can use Han Hao, Shabalba, Reaver. I think my recommendation after this one is probably Reaver, just because you get a school blade for yourself, which is good for your solo fights, which I feel like you might need a little bit more of. So if you don't want to use Private Eye, you don't want to do Gas or Conspiracy Raid right now, then I recommend just getting a Reaver amulet. And then after that, you can just pick whatever amulet. You can even use the Hex amulet from the Mushu Gold Key Boss. The amulet on there has a circle socket, which also does give a hex item card. So you can make an argument for that too. So I think those are probably like my recommendations in my opinion. Other than that, use whatever amulet with the circle and triangle. Ring, we are using Reaver, or you can use Avatar. Just make sure you have these sockets. And then the pet, we are using this pet, which is a little bit different than from my other setups. But it's a pet that has double pierce, all damage, as well as mighty on your Frilla. And you combine that with the set bonus, which you also get the 5 damage. Also, I do want to mention, and I'm only mentioning this on specifically for Ice Wizards, I do actually use the Hellhound card in here. There's been a time where I actually had to use this and do Hellhound Incendiate. Yeah, I know, it sounds weird, but it was a thing for me at one point. So that's why I'm giving this like a plus extra, because I like the item card on it. Of course, you use the Bronto with the set bonus to get that extra 5 damage, as we mentioned. And then the deck, we are using Private Eye because it also does give you that Ice Blade, which is a 45 Ice Blade. Just putting it out there, you Ice Wizards. But yes, you can use Private Eye. You can use any deck realistically that has a circle socket. I prefer Private Eye though. That's been my recommendation, at least for now. Base, that's how you achieve the 201 damage with the 51 pierce. Of course, if you're paying attention to all the sockets, there's that. Now we can move on to the second set, which is the Pierce Mount set, which honestly, I would actually use this more than the first set to a certain extent, and you guys will see why. Because when you look at my stats, I have 200 damage as well as the same exact pierce. I have 51 pierce. You're literally sacrificing 1 damage, and in return you can use whatever pet you want. I think that's like a W by far. So I feel like this is a good set. That's why I'm not using that Frilla as much, and you guys will see when I talk about the pet. But hat, you can use Avatar Reaver, whatever sockets as I mentioned in the beginning of the video. Robe, we're using Demonic or the Motorist Pack Robe. Just remember whatever sockets, doesn't matter. And Demonic and the Motorist Robe Pack, same exact stats. Demonic from the raid, Motorist from the pack. Very straightforward. Boots, we're using Reaver Avatar. I prefer Reaver, but you can use Avatar for the item card to support other hitters. That's completely fine. Wand, we're using Shabalba, but I do recommend getting the attunement rods from the Ghastly Conspiracy Raid because those will eventually have 180 upgrades. Shabalba will not. So my recommendation is get those attunement rods and prep ahead of time. If not, just use Shabalba if you already have it. If not, use the regular attunement rods. If not, Fairy K, or lo and behold, just use Reaver or Avatar Wand. In the Athame, we still are using the Imperial theme, which is the gold key boss for Mushu, or you can use the Avalon one. They both have the exact same stats, just name is different. Just make sure you have these jewels. We are using it specifically for the triangle jewel, but if you don't want to put on a triangle jewel for the epic, just simply switch over to Reaver Avatar and get some extra HP. You'll get another 700 HP plus another about 100 almost from the tier. So you can do this if you don't care about epic jewel, which is completely valid, especially if it's on an ice wizard in my opinion. So there's that. Amulet, we're still using Private Eye, as well as I do prefer the Elemental Blade from here, as mentioned, so that's why I'm using this. But you can use Reaver, that's my secondary option. Third option is probably Mushu Mushu Amulet, sorry. And then after that, you can use whatever. You can use Hunhound, Shababa, whatever. I just prefer this one as my #1 recommendation. And then ring, we are using Reaver. It could be Reaver or it can be Avatar. Just remember to have the correct sockets, of course. And then the pet. See, now with this setup, the fact that we're losing 1 damage, we have the ability to use a pet that gives us a lot more freedom. And the fact is, the cards that are on this pet are really good too. You get that blade, of course, as well as a 1-pip fuel, which is very nice to see. It's not even a 2-pip, it's a freaking 1-pip fuel. And it'll be really good for your solo fights in my recommendations. But you do want to have these stats on the pet, and I do like this variation, because I do have a no shatter jewel. I just couldn't find it in the time for this video, but I'm going to put that on just so it's a little bit more flexible for me. But these are the stats that you want on your pet, which is right here: boon, giver, dealer, mighty, breaker, and giver. You can put giver in the pool and have a boon as your socket, which is completely valid. And some people like to put the mass feint jewel as well, so if you want to do that, by all means go for it. But I like the giver socket, that's just a personal preference. And I really do like the Skeletal Warrior, which there is a video on the channel of how to farm this, and I do recommend it for all those people that are trying to be like min-maxer. But there's some other couple options that we can go over. If you don't want to use the Skeletal Warrior, I should have a graphic on screen, but as I said, #1 recommendation is that Skeletal Warrior gives you a blade, a 1-pip fuel, and a sharpened blade. My secondary option is using the Ice Class Hamster, which you get from Ice Decathlon. Of course, if it's not active at the moment, you're going to have to wait till that comes back. But it gives you a Ice Blade, a Sharpened Blade, as well as an Elemental Shield. I don't really care too much about the Elemental Shield, but the fact that it gives a blade and a sharpened blade, I think that's really good. My third recommendation is the Ghastly Conspiracy Raid pet. I think it's like the Starfish, but what it does is it gives you a Bounce Blade, an Elemental Blade, as well as a School Blade. So in our case, it's an Ice Blade. Very good for the stackability stuff, and the fact is it gives a pet item card for an Elemental Blade, which you can use to support your Storm hitters, your Fire hitters, which is, in my opinion, is good for ice. I made the same thing for life when I mentioned it, just because you are supporting at the same time majority of the time. So hey, that's my recommendation. And then after that, there's a lot of different pets that you can use that are not exclusive, of course. Now I won't have a picture of this on the slide, but basically there's 4 pets that give 2 ice blades, which is the Buddy Bot, the Cool Croc, the Shivers Knight, and the Tundra Howler. So if you want to use any of those 4 pets for the dual blade, basically it gives you 2 ice blades. They're both the same percentage, and they don't stack or anything like that. So if you want to use it for multi-striking, by all means you can use one of those 4 pets for the 2 ice blades. So I'm not gonna, there shouldn't be a graphic for all of them. It's just, I'm just telling you if you are listening. And then my second recommendation after that, when it comes to non-exclusives, is either using a Freezing Rain Core or a Lord of Winter. Both give a blade as well as a bubble. I think it's 35 bubble if I remember. Also, you do get a Supercharge, which is a little bit niche, but still, the fact is you do get an Ice Blade as well as a Balefrost that is a 35, and I think it's good. They both give another card, which, it's subjective. Like the Lord of Winter gives you a Lord of Winter card, and then the Freezing Rain Core does give you a Supercharge that's specifically for ice, so you can make a valid argument for that. But either of those work just because it's a blade and a bubble. And then my last recommendation after that is Ice Dactyl, and the only reason I'm putting this on the list because it's niche, but it gives you that Ice Blade as well as a Hailhound, which I kind of like using the Hailhound at times. I know it's very weird, but there's been times where I've actually used the Hailhound, so that's why I'm putting it on this list. And I mean, hey, you do get a Tower Shield, but I don't think it's worth mentioning because you are an Ice Wizard. But the only reason I'm putting in the niche category is because, hey, you get an Ice Blade as well as a Hailhound. You know what I mean? Now, beyond that, you can realistically use whatever pet. These are just my recommendations. I always have to clarify this because people always ask. If you want to use a pet that gives you a feint, by all means, go for it. If you want to use a pet that gives you like 3 sharpened blades, by all means, go for it. But I still prefer the Skeletal Warrior out of all the pets. That's like my #1 recommendation. And then after that, if you don't have the Skeletal Warrior, you don't want to go out and farm it, realistically use whatever pet you want. You just need to have the correct stats. So either use one of the ones I recommended or I mentioned while I was talking, or use a pet that's faint or sharpened. Either of those work. Then we can move on. We do use the Clockwork Courser with this setup, and then as well as on the deck, we are using Private Eye with a damage socket. Very straightforward, and that's how you achieve the 200 damage with 51 pierce. The only difference between this setup and the Frilla source stat bonus is that you lose 1 damage, but you get the freedom of using whatever pet you want. So I think that's a plus. Now we can go over the no mount setup. The main difference is, of course, you're just taking off the mount. So you still are rocking whatever pet you want with the same exact stats. The only literal difference is you're taking off the mount. And you still will have 200 damage, but your pierce will be 49. So you'll be 1 away from my recommendation, which is around 50 pierce, which is like what I try to aim for a majority of my setups. But I mean, hey, like what can you like ask for? You're at 200 damage, you have freedom on your pet, and you're close to 50 pierce, which is going to happen. Ice wizards are kind of like that. Life wizards are like the same thing when it comes to like making these builds. So that's just my recommendation. But I'll quickly go over something real quick. It's just Avatar Reaver, Demonic or Pack Robe, Boots or Reaver Avatar, Wand Shabalba or the Rod Wand or the Fairy K Wand, or Avatar Reaver. In that order is my recommendation. The Athame, you can use Mushu Gold Key Boss or Avalon Gold Key Boss. I use it because Triangle Socket. If not, use Reaver or Avatar for the extra HP. Amulet Private Eye, use whatever amulet at the end of the day that has a circle socket. Reaver or Avatar Ring. Pet, as I mentioned. And of course, watch the previous section of the video where I go over all the different pet options you guys have. Mount, no mount, and then the deck is all damage. Beater on that, just so I don't spend like 20 minutes trying to explain stuff, because I've already explained it in the previous section. Now, I do want to mention now the niche build section, which is going all damage, which is something you can do, and I'll explain why you would do this. So this is the first setup, and also explain the other setup. You basically have like near identical. With this setup is 237, which, I mean, hey, you're getting to like basically where the curve starts. And then of course your pierce goes down to 27%, and this is with the Frillasaur. So you're using a Frillasaur with double pierce as well as using a Stompy, and then all your sockets are basically damage for everything. That's like the main thing. You're still rocking all the same pieces. The only difference is now every circle socket is damage instead. That's how you achieve that 237 damage but 27 pierce. And then the other setup, which is right here, if you want to use a pierce mount here, is that you can just go back to using the Frillasaur, or not the Frillasaur, the Skeletal Warrior, and then of course everything else is still going to be all damage sockets. Hence why I'm just mentioning this as a quick reference. Which your setup becomes 236, or you're 1 away from 237, but your pierce is at 27. So the main difference, I believe, is just like that 1 damage. I can, if I remember, 237. Yeah, it's just 1 damage difference. So I mean, hey, if you want to do that, by all means. I wanted to mention that in this video, but my thing is if you do this, be careful, because if you fight a mob that has a lot of res against you or spam shields, you're going to be crying. So I don't really recommend this setup. And of course, I'm not going to mention shads, but when I go over the deck setup, I'll explain some shad stuff for ice, because it actually is, there's some valid reasons behind it. But hey, I just wanted to put this out there. If you want to do something like this, by all means, go for it. Just be very careful when you're doing all damage stuff like this. Yes, you'll have the damage that you want, which is 237, which is where the curve starts. But in return, your pierce is in shambles. If you're fighting those mobs that have a decent amount of res, you're just cooked. Or it requires you to buff more to like make up that damage that you're missing. That's just my opinion. So that's why I still want to include this for those people who do like doing all damage and really want to hit the curve no matter what. Or really want to hit the start of the curve, I mean. And the setup is just exactly the same as all the previous ones. It's just now I'm just using circle sockets that give all damage, and we're switching up that pet for that specific thing. Now, when it comes to deck builds, I do want to mention this, of course, just like how I've been doing it for my previous videos. This is something you would run. You would have the epic jewel as well as your 2 epics that you pack in normal, with a Frost Giant, Count Crocula, and a Blizzard. And of course, set your pips to myth. Now, this is what you would use for your traditional mob fights, just Frenzy and then hit into your Frost Giant. Now, what some people also do is they take out an epic and they put in a sharpened blade, as well as they take out their Frenzy and put in a regular blade. Or what some people even use specifically for ice is that you just put in an item card from here, and that kind of just works as well. So you have a little bit of different options, of course, that you can do. What I would honestly just do instead is just keep your Frenzy, and then of course, instead just take out an epic and then put one of your item card 45s, because this is basically already sharpened bladed. So you can have 4 cards, 5, 6, and 7. So this is something you would realistically do as well if you're doing your mob fights. Something similar, just don't rock a 20 card deck for mob fights. You don't need that. If you need extra blades, sure, but there's that. Now, I know some people, and I've heard people mention this to me a lot, and you know, hearing it a bunch of times, I can understand, and I've heard ALH talk about this as well, is using Freezeway, but you're specifically having the tier that's 7 pips. Now, I can understand why you would use this because the damage difference is night and day between Frost Giant and Freeze Ray. Now, who knows what happens to Freeze Ray whenever they, do the whole shad changes further into the future, and Freeze Ray might just get chalked. But for now, I can see an argument for Freeze Ray and packing it. But I just don't like the shad generation in Wiz just because it's not consistent. If it was consistent, maybe I can make a valid argument for it, but it's not consistent. Even I did some testing on stream. We had a person have like a really high shad rating, and the fact is they didn't get a shad till like round 4 maybe. And me with my basically just my traditional normal setup, I got a shad rating on round 2. So it doesn't make sense. Sometimes I'll get a shad, sometimes I won't. So that's why I don't really like packing Freeze Ray, and people divert from it. So for example, let's just say you do Frenzy, and then, oh, you get a shad next round. Okay, I'm gonna use Freeze Ray. Oh, well, if I don't get a shad, I'm just gonna Frost Giant. By all means, you can do that, but that's not my style of gameplay. I don't want to pack something if I'm relying on RNG for it. So that's why I just take it out. But don't max out your Freeze Ray, because the reason why you're using it for 7 pips is so you can use it on round 2. Of course, if you have it as the 8 pip variation, you can't use it round 2. You're going to have to wait till round 3. Unless somebody donate pips you or you empower. Argument completely different. But for your traditional stuff, I think something like this is fine. 3 hits, you have your 2 epics, and then you have your Frenzy, and then your item card 45 blade. Instead of just packing a sharpened blade and a regular ice blade. And of course, when it comes to boss fights, you do have all the item cards from the setup. You have your ice trap as well. You do have your elemental blade, you have a balance blade, and your moon trap. You can even pack feints, of course, which you're going to need most of the time. You only need to pack like 2 of these with a potent, which that basically covers what you need. And then of course you can pack some extra blades, maybe like some elemental or maybe your school blade. I feel like school blade is way more important just because you're getting all this other stuff, and you can passively gain pips while you're doing it. So something like this, for example, for a boss fight works, and then maybe like a single hit in case the boss has like some sort of cheat where you can't AoE. But still, you guys get the gist. You don't need like a 50 card deck, just something very simple like that kind of just works for boss fights. And then when it comes to sideboard, you should be packing, for example, you should be packing Cleanse Charms, you should be packing Empowers, Dark Packs. Dark Packs are good just to like, if you get hit with a -90, which I feel like they've been doing a lot of, you can Dark Pact out of it and get yourself a blade. You can also use Empower to get rid of the weakness, get some pips back in return. Also, you should pack a Reshuffle. It's better to pack it inside than main for your solo questing purposes, just because it's 3 pips while the traditional Reshuffle that's main deck is 4. And then, of course, when it comes to Myth, you should be also packing like Shatters and Pierce. Who knows, what if you're fighting a boss that has that -90 shield or some weird shield? It's just good to have, of course, for those emergency scenarios. So something along those lines. You can pack other stuff in your sideboard, like, of course, like extra hits for ice, for example, or if you want to pack like a heal or something, sure. But you don't really need to worry about healing on an ice right now. I mean, unless you're trying to do like solo of like the old bosses like Devour or something like that, then you'll need it. But when it comes to like traditional stuff, like you're just questing through, for example, like Selenopolis and moving forward, you're not going to need like crazy heals in your sideboard. You're just going to need stuff to be able to like reliably deal with all the negative charms or like shield spam, stuff like that. So that's just my recommendation when it comes to deck building. At the end of the day, build your deck as much as you want, but I do notice it a lot that people pack full card decks for casual PvE, and then they complain that they can't pull anything. And I witness this way too much, and I want to kind of like direct people towards like a better direction. Don't pack a full deck, pack like maybe like 7, 8, 9, 10 if really need be, or maybe like a row, maybe 2 rows. But beyond that, don't go like a half full deck or like a full card deck, and when you're just questing and doing a mob fight, that's just my take. Now beyond that, that's realistically it for the setup. Now I did have to mention, like I said, the ice damage build, just because the fact is you're not really hitting the curve that easily on ice till you run full damage rolls, and then if you do that, you sacrifice your pierce. So it does have some downsides to it compared to all the other schools where they can basically hit the curve and really have 50 pierce at the same time, while ice and life kind of have, well, I have to rock a bunch of damage rolls and such, but in return my pierce is in shambles. So you're basically playing a game of like, do I want damage or do I want pierce? That's why I prefer the 50 pierce builds, and I do lose damage, of course, but at least I have 50 pierce, because a lot of these mobs have like really good res, and that 50 pierce is really good. And then of course there's been times where they just give them tower shields for no reason. Of course they might even give them chromatic shields, where it's like they put a shield of your school, and then it becomes a little bit more annoying at that point. Sometimes you can just comfortably hit through it with 50 pierce, but if you rock the all damage build, sometimes you're not going to be as confident because, hey, there's a shield, you don't have the most insane amount of pierce, so you have to worry about that. And then on those builds, at least you get a little bit more freedom towards your pet, and you can use the Frilla set bonus as well with the damage, but realistically, I don't mind losing a 1 damage on an ice in favor of a Pierce mount to be able to use whatever pet I want to get more stackability. So I kind of lean towards the Skeletal Warrior build with the Pierce mount instead of the Frilla Source stat bonus. But if you are trying to be like a min-max person and you want the most amount of damage in Pierce, of course you're going to do the Frilla Source stat bonus to get that 1 extra damage. So just wanted to put that out here as some extra notes. But that is it for me. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. Be sure to leave a like, subscribe, all type of stuff. Appreciate everyone that's been subscribing. We're on that grind towards 10k subs by the end of the year, and hopefully we can achieve it. But like I said, that's it, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Peace out, guys.